Crown News UK, Europe on edge as NATO faces rising Russian threat. Welcome to Crown News UK. As global attention remains fixed on the Middle East, anxiety is quietly building across European NATO members over a renewed threat from Moscow. Today we explore what's fueling this concern and examine the war's mounting toll inside Russia. This week's NATO summit in The Hague was meant to project unity and resolve. Instead, cracks appeared, most visibly in the alliance's most powerful member, the United States. The key debate wasn't just about raising defense spending to 5% of GDP, it was also about keeping the US president engaged. The summit was cut to just 2.5 hours due to fears President Trump might grow bored. More worryingly, there are growing doubts about whether he even sees Russia's aggression as a priority. Despite attempting to spin events in his favor, Trump appears increasingly cornered by his entanglement with Israel's Netanyahu and a military standoff with Iran, an involvement many of his voters oppose. There's concern that he could be similarly paralyzed in the face of Russian provocations, potentially allowing President Putin to act unchecked. Putin was very nice, Trump recently remarked. He offered help with Iran. I told him I needed help with Russia. Following Israel's strike, Russia escalated attacks on Ukrainian civilians and is profiting from Middle Eastern instability. Oil prices have surged by nearly 20%, a critical boost for Moscow as hydrocarbons make up over 60% of its exports and a third of its state revenue. Russia now plans to spend 6.3% of its GDP on defense in 2025, its highest level since the Cold War. Satellite images show a dramatic military buildup. Troops near Finland, activity close to Estonia, and upgrades at Russia's Kaliningrad nuclear base. Finland's military intelligence warns that Russian troop numbers on its border could triple within 5 years. In response, nations bordering Russia are reconsidering their participation in the anti-personnel mine ban. Latvia's latest intel highlights a spike in airspace violations. These aren't just symbolic moves. They indicate preparations for a broader conflict and perhaps a test of NATO's Article 5. Putin recently reiterated his claim that Ukraine belongs to Russia and extended this logic to any territory where Russian soldiers set foot, placing all former Soviet states, particularly the Baltics, within his sights. Germany's defense chief warns that Putin is preparing for a westward military offensive, likely culminating by 2029. Across NATO's eastern flank, wartime readiness is no longer theoretical. Trauma kits, medic armor, and casualty preparation are being prioritized. Meanwhile, Ukraine's audacious Operation Spiderweb, which destroyed over 20 Russian bombers, humiliated the Kremlin and intensified pressure on Putin from hardliners who now urge him to declare war officially. Why hasn't he? Because the Special Military Operation designation still allows Putin to avoid full mobilization. But a provocation, perhaps in NATO territory or through allies like Belarus, could offer Moscow a pretext for mass mobilization without even mentioning Ukraine. Sky News recently ran a podcast simulation, The War Game, where UK politicians role-played a Russian attack. It revealed how unprepared the UK and by extension other Western countries might be. Even NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte didn't downplay the stakes. If you won't spend 5% now, fine, but be ready to learn Russian. Though critics accuse NATO leaders of hyping the threat to justify budget hikes, the reality is unavoidable. Since 2022, defense planners have already calculated what's needed. Now the challenge is paying for it. Rutte suggests splitting the proposed 5%, 3.5% for military capabilities, and 1.5% for infrastructure, cyber defense, and mobility. Transporting tanks across Europe, refueling aircraft, or preventing grid collapses are just as critical as firepower. The EU's Rearm Europe and Readiness 2030 plans earmark £800 billion for collective defence. Still, Spain and Slovakia have secured exemptions. Slovakia's PM Robert Fico even hinted at leaving NATO, while Trump insists the US will stick with 3.4%. Trump, second only to Lavrov in his criticism of NATO, questions the alliance's relevance, echoed by Italy's defence minister. European far-right and far-left factions continue to sympathise with Moscow, arguing military spending guts healthcare and pensions for a threat that feels distant. Eastern European countries disagree. They know trouble won't stay in the East forever. As Edward Lucas notes, while the East prepares, the West remains trapped in a 1990s mindset, failing to adapt defense, deterrence, and resilience strategies. Critics often point out Article 5 doesn't compel NATO members to act, only to consult. That vagueness is the deterrent. But credibility is NATO's true vulnerability. Trump's erratic foreign policy, fluctuating from Gaza to Greenland to Canada, has undermined that deterrence.